right, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Everybody please rise for the pledge.
That's impressive. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, welcome to our February work session meeting. Going to turn it to Dr. Malash right off the bat for some presentations.
Thank you, Dr. Dickinson. I'm very excited that we are welcoming some folks from Rotc with us this evening for recognition of the second place national award with the American Scholastic Press Association. It's Rotc Middle School student staff for the art and literary magazine One World. And I left a copy out for all of the board members in front of your spot. So I'm going to ask Ms. Silverstein and Mr. Guy to join Mrs. Wilson and I up by the podium. And then Sky, if you'll just kind of explain to folks what this is, what went into it, and all that kind of thing. And then we will invite the kids to come up, be recognized, look at certificates, have them walk through and shake everybody's hand. All right, so Mr. Guy and Ms. Silverstein, if you go through and explain what you guys did.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for this honor for our wonderful Rotc artists and writers. Basically, we come together once a week to create this magazine. That's our goal. We make one per year. And last year was my first year working with this group when Elizabeth Wagoye went out on leave after having her baby. And I just couldn't ask for a better group of people to work with. Their creative spirit is very inspiring. I wrote like a 1-minute speech. Should I save that for the end or do that now? Okay. Picasso once said that the artist is a receptacle for emotions that come from all over the place, from the sky, from the earth, from a scrap of paper, from a passing shape, from a spider's web. These students embody the true spirit of the artist, both writers and visual artists. They find inspiration wherever they go, and they are moved to create. Beyond the act of creation, though, is the more difficult act of sharing one's creations with the world. This is a true act of courage, to bare your soul to the world around you. I'm so proud of, I feel weird not being able to see them while I'm saying this. So I'm so proud of you people, these students who have bared their souls to the Cherry Hill community, to the Rotc community, as writers and artists sharing their gifts with us.
We want to thank Mrs. Silverstein and the wonderful parent and guardians and the wonderful participants of our art and literary magazine. They've just done a fine job, and we're excited to recognize them this evening. Thank you so much.
So I will read off the names, and then when we are finished, when everybody gets their certificates and shakes hands with everyone, if you will all meet me out in the lobby area, we're going to take some group pictures for the district website, and then if you'd like to come back for the rest of the meeting, you may. You certainly don't have to. So we will get going with the names. First, we have Rachel Augusto Ginsburg. Naomi Bergstein. Tiernan Dowdle. Emily Haya. Ishani Hirata Chandran. And Shivani Hirata Chandran. Ananya Kedkar. Sarah Coe. Gina Liu. Abby McCarthy. Dominic Scott. Yaz Shaughnessy. Trey Shelton. Gary Yu. And Abby Yu. And we had Kira Riley and Emma Ronch, who I'm told could not be here tonight, so we will make sure they get their certificates.
Folks, Mrs. Wilson, so kids, Mrs. Wilson's going to get your picture in the hallway.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Malash and administrators. We'll now move into our first public comment period. At this time, we will have, your comments must be regarding items on the action agenda. When you come to the mic, please state your name and address. You will have 3 minutes for your remarks. Please note that the green light will turn yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining. The light will turn red when your 3 minutes are up.
My name is Rick Short. My address is 1002 Chelton Parkway. I have some comments on the section under school district security. It's the second reading. I'm not going to go into great detail because these are some of the faults. So it's not in my best interest to go in detail and everything, but these are the things that I find wrong with the current system.
Mr. Short, I got to stop you. That's actually on the work session, so that you have to wait until the next comment period. Sure. Anybody else for anything on the action agenda? No? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move into our action agenda. Mrs. Seidel, would you move the CNI agenda for us?
I sure will. Thank you, Dr. Dickinson. Sorry, just need to adjust my mic here. The superintendent recommends and I move the following. Number 1, approval of attendance at conferences and workshops for the 2017-2018 school year. Number 2, approval of out-of-district student placements for 2017-2018 school year. Number 3, approval of high school course of study guide for 2018-2019 school year. Number 4, approval to amend IDEA fiscal year 17-18 budget to reflect carryover funds. And number 5, you have the yellow sheet in front of you, approval of special education settlement agreement. Do I have a second? Mrs. Schultz, any questions or comments? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes to all.
Mr. Goodwin,
Yes.
Mrs. Judge,
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Dr. Wong,
Yes.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes to all. Mr. Goodwin, would you move the BNF agenda, please?
Yes, I will. The superintendent recommends and I move the following. 1, approval of bill list. 2, resolution for the award of bids. 3, resolution approving regular education tuition student for the 2017-2018 school year. Do I have a second? Mrs. Seidel. Are there any questions? If not, Mrs. Sugars.
Mr. Goodwin,
Yes.
Mrs. Judge,
Abstaining on number 1, the bill list regarding the Cooper Health System. Yes to the remainder.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel,
Abstain with respect to CDW on the bill list. Yes to the rest.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
I need to abstain from Beata Home Health on the bill list. Yes to the rest.
Dr. Wong,
Yes.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes to all. Mrs. Judge, would you move the HR agenda, please?
Yes, Dr. Dickinson, thank you. The superintendent recommends and I move the following. Number 1, termination of employment certificated. Number 2, termination of employment non-certificated. Number 3, appointments certificated. Number 4, appointments non-certificated. Number 5, assignment salary change non-certificated. Number 6, other compensation certificated. Number 7, other motions, and we have the pink handout with additions to number 1 and number 6, and in addition, number 8 on the back, other motions. Do I have a second? Mrs. Matlack. Any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Judge,
Yes to all.
Mr. Goodwin,
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Dr. Wong,
Abstaining to the item 3, appointments involving Rutgers University and the Rowan University, and yes to the rest.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes to all. Mrs. Scarpolino, would you move the P&L agenda, please?
Certainly, Dr. Dickinson. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Approval of harassment, intimidation, bullying, investigation decisions, excluding items numbers 4112 and 4162 as they are being removed from the agenda tonight. And number 2, waiver of regulation 2340 field trips. Do I have a second? Mrs. Judge, are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Yes.
Mr. Goodwin,
Yes.
Mrs. Judge,
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Dr. Wong,
Yes.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes to all. And seeing that we have no strategic planning agenda items yet, we'll move right into our work session. Mrs. Seidel, would you share the CNI committee minutes with us today?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Dickinson. So our last Curriculum and Instruction Committee meeting was held on February 5th at 7 p.m. As usual, we had a packed agenda filled with a lot of great discussion. Unfortunately, we didn't have any members of the we didn't have any audience members, so we had a lot of good dialogue amongst ourselves. But first up on our agenda was an ROTC presentation from the folks at West, the West Air Force Junior ROTC team. We had several cadets that presented on the benefits of the ROTC program, the ROTC curriculum, their accomplishments. I was really surprised to hear that over 100 students participate in the AFJR OTC at High School West. So it was really a really enlightening presentation for me, and it was great. We have been invited to pop in at the ROTC prom, which I believe is coming up soon. We've also been invited to visit during a summer academy that they have an opportunity to participate in that sounds wonderful. I know Dr. Mahan's not here, but there was a great presentation that I'm going to ask if can be shared with you in next Friday's packet. So there's some pictures of all of their activities. It was really nice. The students were great. It's nice to have just some informational presentations, and that's what that was. It was really great. So we'll share that presentation with you guys on Friday. Next, we talked about an update on the high school park schedules. So the high schools have been working on a 4-day schedule with a 7-day schedule for students who require extended time. The middle school schedule, the middle schools originally were trying to fit into that same schedule, but the 4-day schedule presented too many logistical issues at the middle schools, so it's looking like it's going to be adjusted to a 7-day schedule. Technology is in place with all of the devices and increased bandwidth necessary to support the schedules at both the middle and the high school. So that's great news. Again, reducing the number of days for the park schedule is fantastic. So great job to everybody on that. We had an update on dual credit courses. There was a question from the previous C&I meeting. Folks were wondering the number of students who participate in the dual credit courses. And we got confirmation that there's 6% of students at West participate in dual credit courses and 5% at East. So that's great, and I think we expect to see those numbers increase as our partnerships continue to grow. As you know, we've had several new partnerships just this year alone for dual credit course offerings. So that's fantastic. We talked a bit about school performance reports presentation. Dr. Mahan reviewed the performance reports in greater detail. As you know, I think 2 Friday night packets ago, there was a lot of documentation for you to review for the school performance report cards. Dr. Mahan reviewed the performance report in greater detail, the data highlights, and provided an update on the district's success in closing achievement gaps. I know Dr. Mahan is not here. Can someone share some of those statistics that were in the presentation? There were some great percentages that we discussed. I know we had a presentation that we were referring off of, so I didn't take the notes, and that will be sent to all of you as well. I just thought that we're making some improvements. That was really good to see, so I thought if we could highlight those. You sent them to me? Okay. Hang on one sec. In my email? Okay. All right, so while I'm looking for that, let me skip down to the couple other items that we covered, and then I'll go back to this because I'm not seeing the email just yet. But that would be wonderful if you don't mind. I just thought that they were worthy of presenting.
So I have the presentation up in front of me. Dr. Meehan talked about the subgroup African American, and in the levels 1, 2, and 3, there was a decrease, and those are levels where the achievement is lower, and there were increases in levels 4 and 5 where the achievement is higher. So we are closing the gap for students who are not performing well. That number is shrinking, and for students who are performing well, that number is increasing, and that was for the subgroup African American. and it was the highest increase percentage in levels 4 and 5. It was up 8% from 16-17 school year. And that's a larger gain than in both the subgroups white and Asian. So there was similar data in the Hispanic subgroup with an increase in levels 4 and 5 of 4.5% from the 16-17 school year. And then in the subgroup economically disadvantaged and students with disabilities, there were gains of 3.7% and 3% respectively.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mahan also went into detail about the summative score that was assigned to each school and understanding how the score was achieved and also how to use and read the reports. So it was really helpful. Again, we received a lot of data, and it was really helpful to understand how to really drill down to the key pieces of that data. So I did, Dr. Campisi, just get the document. Thank you. So I'll be sure to share it. Or will you guys put it in the Friday packet? It'll be in the Friday packet. But I just go back to that in a second. I just want to finish up our final item that we talked about and then see if anybody else on the committee wanted to go in further detail about the school performance reports presentation. But the last item on our agenda was the high school final exam schedule. Can't believe we're at that point in the year already where we're talking about the final exam schedule, but we did get a copy of the Cherry Hill East and West final exam schedule for 2018. So that is distributed, and I believe, has it already been posted on the high school websites, or is it due to be posted soon? Okay, great. Okay. So does anybody have any questions, comments, any discussion from any of the other C&I members or anyone else? Ms. Scarpolino.
I just had a question on the park schedule. The high school is going to have a 4-day schedule. Didn't we get it down to 3 days last year? Or am I wrong about that?
So we were trying to work down to a 3-day schedule. And last year we were able to get it to a 3-day schedule, but with different needs with different groups of students. We just couldn't make it happen that way this year, so we have a 4-day schedule and then a 7-day schedule if need be for students that might need extra time and accommodations. Oh, and we have an extra section too.
Oh, there's an extra section.
Yeah, there's an extra section this year too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mrs. Judge.
So I have a question on the reports and the summative scores that I read. I think you sent it in a Friday email a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. Now this came up at Garden State Coalition of Schools, and I know the superintendents that were at that meeting were a little upset with that. It was made public at the same time that I think schools got it, and it can be interpreted by the public wrong, I guess, is the best word I can think of. But just looking at that as a layman, when we have a school that is at 97.24 and then we have another school in the districts that's at 20.56, was that discussed at all? And can the rest of the board members be privy to how that was? And I know Dr. Mahan isn't here, so it's kind of...
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to either Dr. Campisi or Dr. Malash, but I will say what Dr. Mahan did discuss at our C&I meeting was the factors that go into that summative score. We talked a lot about that, and again, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but park scores are a big component of that. And also what I found fascinating is chronic absenteeism plays a huge factor into that score, and chronic absenteeism is 18, I have this right, is it 18 days or 10% of more than 10% of the days that a child's in school? So think about that. So if a child is out 2 days a month, that would classify them as, chronic absenteeism. So, and those are really two of the only, and graduation rate. Thank you. Dr. Campisi's feeding me lines across the room. So, and the graduation rate. So those are the three things that make up that summative score. So just keep that in mind, and that was part of what we discussed at C&I. As for the actual data, and the disparity between some of the schools. I'll turn it over to Dr. Malash.
Let me just say too, just with the graduation, remember they changed the graduation. It's students, well, graduation, and then students enrolled in college 16 months after graduation is the score for which the schools are held accountable. I don't know that we have a lot of control over kids 16 months after they graduate from high school about where they are, but that is one of the pieces that goes through.
But the big is there a why? Is there an educational look at this as to why one of our schools would be? Granted, one of the schools is elementary school is at 97%, and the one that I'm referring to is one of our high schools is at 20 point whatever I said. Do we have an educated guess as to why? And what we can do about it to improve it?
Yes, and I will say that I thought we had a great discussion last Monday night, and the CNI meeting went for a little more than 2 hours as we were here. And at one point, Mrs. Seidel said, "I wish the public was here, to listen to this discussion about where it went through." So there's a couple of pieces, right? So the scores are the scores, right? Now, do I think that the park assessment is a fair assessment of the progress and the development within our individual schools? I do not. And when it's weighted so heavily in terms of how scores are ranked, I think that's problematic on its face. There are inherent issues that exist with paper and pencil standardized tests, right? There are inherent biases that exist. And we've talked about it, as a board and in CNI through the years. We could sit down, and I'm sure when you talk to the folks from Garden State, if I told you what the district factor group of a high school was, for the most part, we will be able to rank where they're going to be in terms of test scores. We just are. That's not a Joe Malashism. That just is factual in terms of what goes through. You then have a piece of how our kids, with the park assessment, we still have a group of kids in grade levels that not a lot of kids took the park assessment, right? And Val has come in here and talked about the reality of, are they valid scores? What does that really mean in terms of measuring the program? We discussed with CNI different levels of transiency that exists in some of our schools. One of the things that we know hard and fast is the longer that we have children in our schools, the more successful they are and the better academically prepared that they are. We serve different populations in the 19 schools that we have. Again, just a reality in terms of some of the things. We've had at CNI during the course of the year, Dr. Campisi and Dr. Mahan and the high school principals and folks from CNI have talked about specific tasks and specific things that are being done within the schools to target deficiencies in terms of performance. And we truly can look at individual, down to the individual child level about performance. What do we need to do for individual kids, and then what do we need to do in terms of what our curriculum says, and then what are the actual instructional practices that take place in the classroom on a daily basis? How do we monitor it? There's administrative walkthroughs that are taking place in the buildings as well. So it's a multi-layered approach that goes through. Those numbers, the 0 to 100 numbers that are assigned to all the schools are buried in the report. They are. In the Department of Ed, Peter Schulman, who was the former deputy commissioner at the state, will tell you that they purposely buried in the report because they don't put a lot of stock in terms of what they are because of what it's based on. They are an ESSA requirement.
He really say that?
He
because
absolutely said that.
Because not the general public takes, okay.
Correct. But it's an ESSA requirement, right? It's part of the federal law that those numbers have to be there. And they are what they are. Would I like to see that there is more parity between the schools? I would. I would also like to see everybody improve in terms of what goes on. We've seen terrific growth. LaCoya went through and talked about where in some of the areas we can demonstrably say where we are reducing achievement gaps. Not just that everybody's improving, but we can demonstrably say we're reducing achievement gaps in terms of where they exist. But there's work to be done. There absolutely is work to be done.
And I just want to say publicly, I know that some of the schools that didn't score very well, just bluntly, because that's just what it showed, are doing some fantastic work. Doing some fabulous work. And it just kind of hurts to look at that and go, well, if a parent is looking at that, because it was posted on Facebook. So if a parent's just looking at that one number and not aware of, well, it reflects, it's not reflecting what we're really doing, I guess, is what's frustrating. It's me sitting here as a board member.
I would agree. I don't think when you boil things down in such a broad stroke to an individual number that it's reflective of what goes on in any of our schools, good, bad, or indifferent, in terms of what's there. There are phenomenal programs that exist in all 19 of the schools. There's tremendous success of the kids as they come through, and lots of opportunity and options for kids when they graduate, from our high schools. There are wide-ranging differences in terms of, in terms of the children that are in our schools, right? That's just the part of the beauty of the community in which we live. As an individual number, do I think it's fair? I don't. Do people like to compare? They absolutely do. And not just to celebrate success, but to demonstrate one's better than, than a number. And it's challenging, I will tell you, for staff and for parents and for kids to look at those numbers and say, well, I don't think that's really reflective, of who we are, or of what's going on. Again, absolutely room for improvement and things that need to be done in ways differently. One of the best parts of the discussion, I think, that took place last Monday night with CNI was truly a discussion about equity. And do we equitably distribute resources? In a lot of ways, we equally distribute resources, but do we equitably distribute resources? If we know that there are schools that have higher challenges and more needs, are we equitably assigning resources as a district to where those, to where the kids are and what those schools are? In some instances, a little bit, but probably not as much as we could.
So at Garden State, not to beat that drum, but at Garden State in January, the reports were just released, and we are one of the larger districts that sits at that table. And there are a lot of districts have high scores and not so high scores. And it was mentioned by more than one superintendent that was at a Department of Ed meeting that number was not going to be public. And so there was a huge frustration at that table, and but we're not, Cherry Hill's not abnormal. There's a lot of districts, but again, we're one of the larger districts sitting at that table that had huge disparity from perceived high number to perceived low number.
Right, and again, we've talked about it, right? So we're the 12th largest district in the state. There are very few districts in the state that are comparable in size or in district factor group to Cherry Hill. There just are. Most of the districts that are larger than us are urban, and some of the suburban districts, we talked to earlier, Toms River is larger than we are, but they're a CD district factor group, in terms of what's there. Any district that has multiple schools like we do, you're going to see a discrepancy in terms of performance of the scores. Again, just factual reality in terms of what is there. Work to be done. Yeah. Like I said, do I think it's a fair score? I don't. I don't. I think it's a positive or negative. To go through a high score or a low score. One of the things that we talked with the principals about when we first looked at them and talked about the fact that those scores are going to be out there, is as a district, we are 19 schools. We are one school district. We are not, 19 independent schools. We should be celebrating each other's success and championing each other's success and working together. I think the district, the principals and folks within the district understand that. I think one of our responsibilities administratively and as a board is continue to remind the community of that. If we all improve, it's better for everybody. In terms of what goes on. Again, when everything relies so heavily on an assessment that we have a lot of families and a lot of kids did not take seriously, other than I know the requirement is I have to sit for the test, right?
I hate to see when I see it on Facebook that this is going to impact our housing sales, and it's a score.
It's a score. One of the things that last year I went out and met with 16 families in the process of meeting with the same families and 15 additional ones. And the anecdotal stories we hear when I go out and meet with these folks, people continue to come to Cherry Hill because of the schools. Our reputation is earned. The level of success the kids have when they come out of here is real. And those numbers are in fact there. The other discussion that we've had as we talk about referendum, which will take place on October 2nd, I think the average assessment in Cherry Hill is $231,000 or $232,000, which is great for us as a community. There are many neighborhoods in Cherry Hill that $231,000 or $232,000 does not approach a home to go through. And when that's the average, that's the reality of the community in which we live.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Wong.
Well, it's a complicated issue, definitely. And I don't think those scores are fair. But on the other hand, I still think that we need to find a way to address the low scores. So I want to be frank, and I don't think, Joe, you should say those scores are unfair as the superintendent of the school district. You will say that, yes, that's just one-sided, and we are going to improve the side and do whatever we can. But publicly saying the score is not fair, I don't think that's a good way to deal with the problem, because the score is not fair. But if the score is not fair, then you always have schools in other districts. They are doing better. So in other words, that the score does reflect some reality. So we cannot just say that it's totally unfair and we should not ignore. I mean, we should not pay attention to too much attention to it and so on. As I said, I mean, many parents or the future parents would look at those scores before they move in, so they can move into Morristown versus Cherry Hill. So why they do that? I mean, they will see the scores in those schools in other districts are better. So therefore, they will make the final decision. So to me, I think it's the better way is not to say blaming the score, right? I mean, I wouldn't do that. And I really think that we should look at the criteria and see the areas where we can improve. I was not on the CNI meeting. I understand that you guys had very wonderful talks. I think that's great. So we will address the issues, and we are going to do that, right? So that's, to me, I think that's maybe the better way. Personal opinion.
So, Edward, Dr. Wong, I totally appreciate what you're saying, and I can't wait for you to see this presentation that we saw at CNI, because I think that it will maybe address some of your concerns, because we did talk about some of the highlights and the lowlights, so to speak, of these summary scores. So, we did point out what's working well and what needs to be improved, and we did start to dive into a little bit about what the next steps are for addressing those. So, this, in fairness, this deck should have gone to all of you before we had this meeting, and some of us, we should have had that. I should have made sure that you guys had that before the meeting, because I think it would have made for a little more meaningful dialogue.
Can I just follow up, Lisa?
Absolutely.
And Dr. Wong, I appreciate your comments as well. And as I said, we need to improve. There's always room for improvement. But I will always contend that the way that these scores are generated is not fair, and will advocate on behalf of the kids that are in our schools and the families that are here. I don't think it's an appropriate reflection of what goes on in the schools. I don't. So we will continue to have the discussion. And again, always room for improvement, but I will always advocate on behalf of the kids and the work that goes on.
The other thing, I'm sorry, did you have a hand up, Mr. Goodwin?
Yes. Just one quick question. So is it planned that the presentation is going to go to the whole board at some point? I mean, not just the document, but an actual presentation to the board?
Yeah, this is coming to you guys. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We also, Dr. Malash touched on the great works that we're doing at all our schools. One of the things that we talked about at our meeting was, we should celebrate more of that. I know I've said this before. The ROTC presentation was great, and it was a presentation just to celebrate success of a great program at one of our schools. And I personally would love to see us do more of that, to highlight these great things that make our schools great, but also make them individual. So that's one of the things we talked about. And then, quite frankly, I joked at the beginning that we had nobody in the audience, but we had a 2-hour meaningful, fabulous conversation, and no one was here to listen to it. I mean, there's a whole lot of dialogue about this topic on Facebook, and we had a ton of conversation, but nobody wants to come listen to the real dialogue. They'd rather read about, maybe not so factual information on Facebook. So as a CNI chair, that drives me nuts, because we do have a lot of great information to share, and absolutely, definitely have room for opportunity. But we were talking about how we're going to address that opportunity as well. So, Mrs. Scarpolino.
Just following up on Mr. Goodwin's comment, because I'm not sure. I think what Mr. Goodwin was asking and what I'm asking is, not just getting the PowerPoint presentation, but which I will love to get, and I do wish we had before this meeting, to review, but to actually have the presentation so that we can maybe ask questions of Dr. Mahan if we have additional questions and things like that. So that's what I'm wondering. Are we having that, not just getting the slides? And I think we should have that if that's not something.
I don't think I'm understanding. The presentation is the slide deck. What Dr. Mahan presented at CNI is this deck.
But I'm assuming she gave it some context, fleshed it out, was able to answer questions. We're not going to get that from the slides. And I think there might be additional, I don't know because I have not seen it, but if there's additional questions, I think we should have that opportunity.
Absolutely agree
to have that presentation done to the entire board, not just to the committee.
I agree. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Dickinson.
Thank you, Mrs. Seidel. Mr. Goodwin, would you discuss BNF, please?
Sure. For BNF, we covered a few topics. So we talked about issues with the buildings versus, as well as things coming up on the bond and the referendum. First, one of the top topics, there's some issues at Cherry Hill East, an urgent issue around the transformer room and walls seeming to buckle, those kind of things that are being addressed at this point in time. And that's something that is an urgent issue there. That area has been gated off so that no one can go in that area of the building, and that's currently being addressed. We also talked about the budget and the bond referendum. There's a number of deadlines that are coming up from the bond referendum standpoint that Lynn is currently working on, as Mrs. Sugar is currently working on. And so those deadlines are coming up in the month of March, but also at the same time, the governor's speech is probably going to be delayed. And so there's probably going to be a need for, at minimum, the BNF committee to meet at least an additional time in the month of March to review the budget and those kind of things. That's coming up really quickly, as well as there's a number of deadlines for the referendum that are being worked on to be able to meet the date to provide the details to the state in terms of the information related to what we're going to be doing with the bond referendum, and the state's going to respond to that application after it's submitted. The idea is that we submit it to the state, and then within 60 days, the state is supposed to respond, or if they don't, then we get an automatic approval. So let me see, that's timeline, and so those were the major topics covered. Probably a little bit of overlap with the strategic planning meeting, but those are the main items we covered. Ours wasn't as exciting as CNI, I guess.
I beg to differ. One thing that I wanted to highlight it's on your agenda for next meeting on the 27th is the approval of the long-range facilities plan, the long-awaited long-range facilities plan. This is something that I know started actually before I got here, started to get this updated and ready for referendum, because the process is that we have to approve the long-range facilities plan and then we have to modify it. So actually at the end of March, when you're approving your applications to go into the state, you will also approve a modified long-range facilities plan. And the reason I'm highlighting this is as you can see, it's a very voluminous document that we have here. We did not post it. I brought copies with me if you're interested in looking at it. It's a bit confusing. It's not particularly user-friendly. It's a lot of information. So I brought it with me tonight. If you're interested in taking a look at it, we'll bring it to the next meeting so that you can take a look at it. And if at some point you want to make an appointment to come in and see it, you can certainly do that as well. If you just want to call and talk about it and get a better idea of what it looks like, you can certainly do that. But we were, probably 700 or 800 pages here. we thought that might be a better way to handle that. So if at any point you want some more information about that, we can certainly provide that for you.
Thank you. Any questions, Mrs. Judge?
The transformer room or whatever at East, is that near the lockers from last year with the building issues last year? It's not. Okay.
It is not. If you're facing the building, it's on the right-hand side of the building behind the gym. It's an operational area. It's a loading dock area. It's a transformer room, which is actually owned by PSE&G. We do not have access to. And it's a storage area for us. It's also the boiler room area. So it's operational in nature, so that's a good piece of information. There's some structural concerns about the area. We're taking a look at it right now, working with Mr. Middleton on it. We will probably have to have some geotechnical guidance on this as well. As Mr. Goodwin said, the wall is literally buckling in that area, and obviously that's of great concern. We're trying to determine the why before we determine the how do we fix it. We also are going to have to work with PSE&G to remove the transformer from that room and relocate it. Apparently when that school was built, that was the way they did it. They built a transformer room. They no longer do that anymore. So they're I want to say anxious, but they're looking at this as an opportunity to get rid of the transformer room and to update that equipment. So we have to work with them in order to coordinate this project.
Are they going to pay for it?
My understanding is that they will pay for the actual transformer. We will have to pay for the connection to the transformer.
Any other questions? If not, I'll turn it back to Dr. Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Mrs. Judge, would you discuss HR, please?
Yes, what I can discuss at HR. So the HR committee met on February 6th. As I usually state, most of what we discuss in HR is confidential. We discussed the interim assistant principal appointment at Beck, which we approved earlier this evening on the special action agenda. And then we received a very brief negotiations update, and our next meeting is March 6th. Any questions? I know. I do have something else to say, though. I do. So, before I hand it back to Dr. Dickinson, I just want to remind everybody that Garden State Coalition of Schools is going to be here next Wednesday, 7 o'clock, and our own Assemblyman Lou Greenwald will be here. And I saw that Fair Funding posted the meeting, this meeting on Facebook, so I suspect it'll be well attended. I'm hoping that it's well attended. It's here at 7 o'clock. Yes. Garden State Coalition of Schools. Yes. So you'll meet all my buddies. Yes, we are hosting. I hope it becomes an annual thing, at least South Jersey, at least. And when we were at the meeting in December, was it December? January. The joint school boards dinner with Camden and Gloucester counties. We mentioned it a couple of times, and Carol had somebody that was asking her about Garden State, so we made sure they knew about this. And so again, next Wednesday, 7 o'clock. Hope to see you. And back to you, Dr. Dickinson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Judge. And are you offering to carpool, as usual?
Always. I'd be happy to.
Thank you. Mrs. Scarpolino, would you discuss P&L, please?
Certainly. So we met on Monday, February 5th at 6 o'clock. We had discussed the policy 5512, which is harassment, intimidation, and bullying, which was being revised. The committee discussed the mandatory changes required by the New Jersey Department of Education that must be added to the HIB policy. There's state-required language that must be inserted, and there'll also be sort of further discussion regarding initiation of HIB investigations under the revised state regulations. Some of what is required to be added, we already do. We do that as part of our HIB policy, so we're already kind of ahead of the curve on that. And then about the further investigation, it's kind of giving us a little more leeway to determine whether or not something is needs to be investigated as a HIB or not. So it's not so cut and dry that you have your hands are tied when it's clear that something isn't a HIB or not. And we'll work out how to do that to make sure that we're implementing the law correctly. We also discussed policy 0169.02, which has to do with board members' use of social networks. This was a new one. We had talked about this one the last meeting. We reviewed the policy again and determined it was not substantial enough to warrant moving forward on it. It's not a mandatory policy, and it's really a sort of common sense policy, like behave yourself on social media. We didn't think we needed to put a policy in place saying that. We think we know that as a board. Next, we talked about policy 2431, the athletic competition. We discussed that. If you remember, we have discussed that in the past. We reviewed the language of the policy regarding the district not providing coaching or supervision or transportation for individual competitors that participate in events leading to non-team individual state titles or awards in sports that are not offered as part of the district athletic program. We are working on drafting new language because we see the need for that. We know that is something that makes sense. If we're not involved, it's difficult to supervise it. However, since there has been a policy in the past of doing that, we're thinking of sort of phasing that in so as to not adversely affect students who are currently matriculating and have benefited under our having sent supervision in the past, so that it will affect freshmen going forward, and they will have had notice that that is going to be the policy. Next, we talked about the use and misuse of opioid drug sign-off for athletics. This was informational only. There's a opioid use and misuse fact sheet. It's an educational fact sheet that was created by the New Jersey Department of Ed as required by state law, and it provides information concerning the use and misuse of opioid drugs in the event a healthcare provider prescribes a student athlete an opioid for a sports-related injury. And as we know, a large problem with the epidemic as it is people getting legitimate prescriptions and then it being either misused or becoming addicted from the use of an actual legitimate prescription. So the student athletes participating in interscholastic sports programs and their parents, if the students are under 18, have to provide their school district with a written acknowledgement that they received this fact sheet, just kind of reminding them that just because the doctor gives it to you, there's these potential hazards of using them and to your caution, that kind of thing. And the district director of athletic has developed the acknowledgement sheet for dissemination to the student athletes. So next, we talked about policies and regulation for action. We didn't have any for first reading this month. We did have policies for second reading and adoption, which were ones I reported on last month, having to do with the policies 3437 and 4437 military leave, policy 7440, school district security, policy 7441, electronic surveillance in school buildings and on school grounds. Both the school security one and the electronic surveillance ones are mandatory policies that have been revised. And then policy 8504, breakfast offer versus serve, which again is a mandatory policy that's been revised, and policy 8630, the bus driver, bus aid responsibilities, again, another mandatory policy that is being revised. All the policies were moved forward for second reading and adoption by the committee to the board for action. And then lastly, we discussed the waiver of policy 2340 for field trips, which we actually voted on already in the special action agenda. Both Cherry Hill East and West students are advancing in the DECA competitions. So they're going to Atlantic City for 3 days at the end of the month. So we wish them luck. And we had no public, so we had no public comment. And that was it. Are there any questions? Mr. Goodwin.
For the student athletes that don't have, where there's not a program here in the district. Are your changes going to address or address students that were currently planning on doing stuff but couldn't do things? I mean, were any of the students impacted already as far as the new policy? So like, are there any students that couldn't participate in something already that?
There are a handful of student athletes already. What I don't know, I guess I'll ask Dr. Malash to answer that, because I don't know how they've been impacted or not.
Yes, there were individual students who asked to participate or to be allowed to go to compete who were told no this year.
Okay. So will the changes to the policy help them at this point in time, or is it too late at this point?
Not for competition in their chosen sport this year.
Okay.
But if they're still in the, matriculating next year, and then it would help them. Any other questions? Back to you, Dr. Dickinson.
Thank you, Mrs. Scarpolino. Turn it over to Mrs. Matlack for strategic planning.
Thank you very much. We met on Tuesday, February 6th at 7 o'clock. And again, we had one item on our agenda, and that was the referendum project update. But we had some good discussion, and we're getting started on what projects we're going to include going forward. So I'll read you the notes from the meeting. The committee reviewed the timeline for project submission approval. The board will approve the initial long-range facilities plan at our February 27th meeting, and approval of the project applications to the state and a revised long-range facilities plan that Mrs. Sugars spoke about, which will reflect our proposed projects, will be on our March 27th board meeting agenda. We then reviewed draft project detailed drawings for Johnson, Knight, and Rosa. Each of these schools will receive additional large group spaces, security vestibules, cameras, swipe card access, partial roofing replacements, and masonry repairs. Johnson and Knight would receive toilet room upgrades. Rosa and Johnson would have renovated small group instruction rooms. Rosa and Knight would have HVAC equipment upgrades. And we also spoke about the logistics of the asbestos abatement project at Carusi. Early indications are that this would be a multi-year project, multi-year, like 3 to 5 years we're talking, and that some temporary classrooms over the duration of that time while the abatement is happening may be necessary. So that was just the beginning of our talk about what the projects may include, and just 3 of the schools, actually 4 when you talk about when we talked about Carusi and the asbestos abatement there. And so we have not gotten to all of the schools yet. That was a lot. We saw drawings, and we saw the schematics for some of that, and then our next meeting will include much more and the rest of the schools. And then Mr. Middleton spoke to us about the number of professionals that are currently working on gathering information for these project applications. Bessica Associates, who he works for, is working with Wick Fisher White for plumbing, mechanical, and electrical engineering, Environmental Resolutions for civil engineering, Baker Ingram for structural engineering, Preferred Construction Management for estimating, and TTI Environmental for environmental consulting. In total, there's approximately 32 people who are working on the development of our district projects at this time. We had no public comment at the meeting, but we had some great discussion, and it was exciting to get started with what we're going to do for the referendum. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes.
I'd just be interested to kind of understand the process that we're using to kind of vet out the schools and the projects that are going into the the plan, if you don't mind, because I know when we started and we had the initial 2020 presentation, it was lots of slides with enormous projects. So is that something you can share now, or is that, do you mind just to kind of walk through, like, what, you know, is it needs based, I would assume, or is it, you know, we'd like to have, in an ideal situation, are we kind of narrowing that down?
Yeah, I think unfortunately the needs are very great. I don't know that there's a whole lot of to haves on the list at this point, but basically what we're focusing on right now are health and safety type issues. So as we look at, you know, potentially how we want to structure the question, in the first category we're putting things like all the security measures, vestibules, cameras, all those things. Any kind of envelope type issues, roofing, making sure that the roofing is working, masonry repairs, the asbestos removal, those kinds of anything that would affect health and safety. In the second category, there are things that need to be done. We're looking at HVAC type upgrades. We talk a lot about the paving type things going into that category. So we're really kind of dividing it between health, safety, and then sort of all the other system type upgrades that need to be done.
And when we also, when we talked about the large group rooms and the small group instruction rooms, that was also a health and safety issue, as some of our schools have very, very small APRs where the kids can't all fit in there, and the ventilation is limited or non-existent almost in some of the schools. And so renovations to those spaces becomes a health and safety issue. Any other questions or comments? Dr. Wong.
Well, this is talking about planning, right? So did you guys also have a chance to, at the meeting, talk about the initiatives taken by the parents on fair funding? You know, there was a major petition, and now we have like over 550 maybe people signed already. So this, of course, in line with the referendum, the money, of course. We are talking about how to improve our schools and the facilities and so on, of course. But on the hand, because some parents talk with me and saying that our board should really be the leader in those issues. But now we are sort of like behind them, you know. I mean, I understand to some degree that it's a better move maybe from the parents, from the community. But on the other hand, I guess as a board, we also need to somewhat show our stance on this issue. You know, I personally signed the petition, but I don't know whether other people have signed or whether we should take in some, at least to show some support to the parents who are just working very hard on this issue. So this, of course, is if we only focus on the referendum, and this is, to me, I think for the community, and they will think it's slightly unfair, because if we get all the money locally, then of course you divert the energy from asking the state. And particularly I understand one district has got some money, additional money, because of their strong actions. This is, of course, don't quote me on that, but people are, telling me this, saying that, so that's why they are trying to sue the state, and the state has given them some money. Yeah.
Dr. Wong, that was not on our agenda, but we focused on the referendum. I can speak as a long-term board member to the board's actions regarding fair funding. And you may not be aware, not having been on the board that long, but the parent group grew out of the board's actions with fair funding. And we were told by our legislators that it's all well and good for board members to come to them and ask for more money, and administrators to come and ask for more money, because that's our job, to ask for more money. But what they wanted to hear from were the parents. And so we turned our efforts to the parents and Zone PTA, and we helped them get started in this process. We are continuing as a board to do that. Lou Greenwald is coming next week, as Mrs. Judge mentioned, and invited all of us to be there. And I expect that there will be a large group there. I'm coming home from California that day. My flight lands at 4:35. I already told my husband that I'm not checking a bag so that I can be here for that. So, the board continues that, and, we are grateful for the efforts and the advocacy by our parents who have gotten together to get behind this and to speak to our legislators and to speak on the district's behalf, along with what we can do from our end. Other questions? Mrs. Judge.
I just have, Dr. Wong, I am not aware of any district getting extra money from the Department of Ed. We were fortunate last year to get another 1.1 million from last year. And other districts were also got a surplus, if you want to call it that. Other districts had money taken away. So I'm not aware, I don't know what fair funding is referring to or what the petition is referring to with a school district or districts getting more money right now in this last 6-month period of time, because we got our notification that we were going to get another 1.1 million in July. So fingers crossed. But again, I would like to reiterate what Mrs. Matlack said, that fair funding, they have our full backing and appreciate their work and their effort up in Trenton. I am sure that Chris will be here. Missy will probably be here next Wednesday night, and they're doing some fabulous things. And it's very aware. I mean, people at Garden State have mentioned fair funding, and Betsy Ginsburg, who's the executive director of Garden State, personally invited Chris Benedetto and fair funding to the meeting next week.
Also telling them, of course, that all board members, I mean, in a way, nobody will actually refuse money, right? So we are all in support of the effort. But on the other hand, I still think that at a certain point, of course, we could make a collective kind of statement, or at least showing our strong backing to their effort and also our appreciation of what they have been doing.
Mrs. Seidel.
So I would just like to add that many years ago, professionally, I lobbied on behalf of a particular cause, and in that professional capacity, I was told firsthand that individuals in mass on an issue directly to our legislators have way more power and a bigger voice than any group on these types of issues. So again, I echo Mrs. Matlack and Mrs. Judge in what the board has and will continue to do in support of fair funding. And Dr. Wong, I think I'm hearing you ask what we're doing personally. So personally, I'm doing my own direct letter writing campaign. So, but that's me personally wearing my Cherry Hill parent hat. So I don't really think it's fair to make the assumption that we're not doing things personally, because I definitely am. Again, not as a board member, personally. But I think it's really important that the parent group work in tandem with what the board is doing, because the legislators react to that. Because true or not, they believe it is our job to ask for money, and we don't have as powerful a voice as individual citizens who, march on our legislators with this information.
Well, I mean, we don't want to really engage in a very long debate on that. But on the other hand, I don't think the legislator will say that we all rely on the parents. We are the board of education representing the whole district. So I think our stance should be also considered by them. It's not like now it's only for the masses to take the actions. And we were supposed to be the leaders, and the community elect us to be the leaders. And of course, individually, I'm not saying that you don't support that. As I said, we all support that. But on the other hand, in what way that we will show our support? So, I mean, I'm not saying that the parents talk to me, they are representative of all the parents, but they have been saying that what happened to the board members who were not, coming to our gatherings and so on. And, this is how they are saying. So this is how I think that we possibly should at least this is a start. We can discuss at the board meetings, and in a way that we also other people may have seen that and showing your stance. So that's great. But on the other hand, if we can have a little bit more active kind of a stance or actions, that will be even better. That's my opinion.
Please.
Any other comments or questions?
I just want to say publicly, because the board members know this, but we as individual board members can't take actions on our own. We have to operate as a single board. So we couldn't start a letter writing campaign on our own. We would actually be in violation of the code of ethics under which we operate. So just so the public knows that. We're bound by different ethical requirements that we can't just act as regular members of the public, just to make that clear.
I just wanted to throw one additional thing out. I know Carol and myself and Mrs. Judge and others, we sat in the legislators' offices. We shared spreadsheets with the legislators, and a lot of the data that we collected, previous board members as well, was passed on to the parents group that then was able to take it to another level. And I think, you know, if we as a board feel like there's other additional things that we can do that would further the effort, I'm all for us, you know, thinking about that as a board. But at the same time, I know that we have been in each one of the legislators' office. We've been multiple times in their office. We've been before them, talking to them, asking them for more money, and they were, and as it's been said, they said, well, we want to hear from the parents, and now they're hearing from the parents. So if it'll help in any way, I think maybe we should talk about, you know, is there something that we can do collectively? Or I know at the time it was a part of the P&L committee that we were doing it as well. So I'm not sure if that's something that you might want to discuss in the P&L committee, to talk about that as a possibility. But I just want to make sure that it's clear. It's not that, you know, the board is sitting back or the board members are sitting back and just saying we're not going to do anything. But as a board, you know, we did and have, and I think a lot of what's happening now is spurred from the actions that were taken in the past.
Mrs. Judge.
So not to beat this drum, but so last year, granted it's already been a year, but several of us went down to Kingsway School District and testified in front of the Senate. I went and testified down at Camden County Technical Institute in front of the Assembly Education Committee. Several of us were there, including a couple people from Garden State were there. So not only have we gone to their offices, Beach, Lampett, Greenwald, we've testified in front of the Senate and Assembly Education Committees. And I was at a dinner last February, March, with, it was a joint dinner with Camden County and Gloucester County down at the same restaurant we were at. Had no idea, I didn't even notice on the agenda that it was gonna be legislators. So Lou Greenwald and Steve Sweeney were there. And so I was able to get the microphone last as luck, because there's 100 people in the room, and I was able to say some of my key points of what I testified already in front of the Senate, where Steve Sweeney was there. And in the Assembly, Lou Greenwald was not there because he was not on the Education Committee. But and Steve Sweeney nodded his head several times. I remember you saying that. I remember you saying that. So we and if they have more hearings, I'll be there. Brush off my talk and update the bullets, and I'll be there. And I know several of us would drive together. We will carpool. So hopefully I'm done for the night. Okay, thank you.
Perhaps maybe it's something as
Mrs. Schultz.
I don't want to say like it's as simple as, but even if there's just maybe a board rep or two that goes to the fair funding meetings on Thursday and acts as like a liaison that can report back their efforts, and we can take to them, here's what the individual board members are knowing. Because some of the stuff that you just shared, Ms. Judge, may not be making it to that group. And maybe the efforts of what the fair funding isn't necessarily making it back to us. And then as a board, we can decide and say, okay, well, here's as a board, maybe we can jump in and we can help the fair funding group in this way. It's just a thought, but maybe it's an idea of kind of working alongside that group.
Ms. Malak.
Yeah, Mrs. Carpolino.
Just as the chair of P&L, I'm happy to ask that if we want to look at it, put it on the agenda, and if you have specific ideas or anyone has specific ideas as a jumping off point, that's fine, because it did, before my time, I know it was in P&L, and part of how the Fair Funding Committee got started is because the P&L committee, along with administration, were banging on the doors and meeting with the legislators, and we were being told point blank, like, you're always going to ask for money. We want to hear from the people who are voting for us, frankly. But I am happy to revisit that. I don't know if there's a misperception that because it's gone, there's a fair funding group that's doing marvelous work, that somehow the board and administration are not doing anything currently, because that is not the case. They are continuing to meet, especially the administration, even more regularly than the board, with our legislatures and working on fair funding issues. So if the perception is that, oh, we've handed it off and they're running with it, that is not the case. I think Mrs. Schultz's idea of maybe having someone who can go and be a liaison, fine. I'm not necessarily in favor of doing things for optics only if they're not effective. That's my only concern. I want to work on things that are effective, not for appearances.
Thank you. Dr. Malash.
Thank you. It's a great discussion, right? And it's one that we as a community have engaged in quite a bit over the last few years. Just to kind of encapsulate some of it, I will contend that the concerted effort that occurred between the folks involved in fair funding and the board and the administration and the district paid dividends last year, right? In real dollars, we received more real dollars than most other districts in the state when they adjusted the funding in July. You remember that was the reason the government, part of the reason the government shut down, when they didn't reach the budget at the end of June. We've hosted meetings in this building with Lou Greenwald, with Senate President Sweeney, with Pam Lampett, with Jim Beach, with our local elected officials, with the mayor, with town council. We've asked town council to also, and fair funding folks, also to engage the freeholders in the discussion to go through. But they've been here. They've come to Cherry Hill. Cherry Hill is a known entity in terms of what goes on in regards to fair funding. And I believe that truly paid dividends, when it came time for the discussion of what actually was going on and when the monies were allocated. We continue, I believe, to enjoy a very positive relationship between fair funding. When I go out and do I've done 14 of the 26 additional community discussions. We talk about fair funding. There's handouts that they have provided from the committee that we leave from folks. And there's a new generation of folks that are getting involved in the fair funding discussion every year, which is positive, right? Now, one of the challenges, and we've talked about this as a board, so when the Fair Funding Committee meets in here, they get 15 people, right? When they met last month and Barbara comes and serves as a liaison, if I can't be the whole time, she brings information back, but 15 people, and there were probably 6 or 7 who were relatively new, which is good, right? And whenever I go out, when parents are volunteering, that's a good representation. There's 11,000 children in our school district, 11,000 children, right? So we have talked about what the priorities are, how they're approaching it. They're engaged right now, fair funding, in a phone call campaign to the governor's office prior to his address, right? The governor's going to do address. He's going to talk about what his priorities are, and then following that up, it'll be the letter writing and contacting legislators as they prepare the budget, right? Because we want their efforts to go towards something that's going to be meaningful, and it has to be there. I believe that that folks, at least in the discussions that I've had, that they have an understanding of the board's role and the board's involvement. It's like everything else that we talk about. We are so much better working together, and the board supporting fair funding and fair funding supporting the board, and realizing that, again, it's one pot. You know what I mean? It's one group. You folks leave here tonight and go to your homes in Cherry Hill, just like the people that are in Cherry Hill Fair Funding do. Go to their homes in Cherry Hill, just like I do. We're all paying the same taxes. We're all putting the money to go through, right? So as long as people have that understanding and are working in that same direction, we are better off in terms of what we're doing. But it's a huge discussion point. Having it on in P&L, having updates to go through, I think that's a great place to go. The only caution that I have for you, and you guys can discuss this as a board and discussion with Paul, if you're going to have board representatives go to their fair funding meeting, I'm going to tell you it's going to be as an observer, much as you do when you go and observe the zone PTA meeting. and set in the back. They really can't go. You start to get into some very murky levels and kind of very thin ice with where it is. So they would be as observers. Again, Barb is there. I try to attend as many of them as I possibly can, but it would be in an observation piece. And we can talk about that, and you can discuss with the board as well. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for me as strategic planning chair and our one item of the referendum that we had? No? Okay. Then I will turn it to Dr. Dickinson.
Okay. Got your money's worth tonight.
I did.
All right, so we'll move into our second public comment. You may now comment on any issue. When you come to the mic, please state your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes for your remarks. Please note the green light will turn yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining. The light will turn red when your 3 minutes are up.
Good evening. My name's Rick Short. My address is 1002 Chelton Parkway. Tonight I'm just going to stick with facts. I spoke last time. Fact number one is we all know that the school has $12 million in capital reserves. We also know fact number two, that last year you spent $900,000 for backup generators. And 2 years before that, you also spent $1.2 million on backup generators. So again, I request that you use 1.2, which is about 650 to 700 cameras, and do it before the school year of 2018. Let's move on to fact number four. We talked about this last time. Fact number four is there are more cameras at our school maintenance building than there is at my child's school and the schools of 15 other schools, which is about 8,000 to 9,000 students. Fact number six. When my child goes to school, you know that she gets on a bus, but after that you have no other record of her until she gets back on the bus to go back home. And again, this occurs at 15 other schools affecting 8,000 students, and this happens every day. Number seven, fact number seven, and this has to do with internal cameras in the schools. Again, incident happened on January 31st. There was a bullying incident at Rotc. A student punched another student in the hallway, and there's no record of that. Concerning. It should be very concerning. This my school has one camera. This external. Marlton School has 31. Marlton School has 31 external cameras. Now we're going to talk a little bit about, because I only have 1 minute left, we're going to talk about the weaknesses. I'm not going to publicly, I'm going to redact anything to not put anyone at risk, but I'm just going to read something after I sent it to the my professional. She wrote, with no security cameras and no way of tracking coming and going of people, there's no accountability for the safety of each children. Blah, 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 blah. Every parent in this township puts their faith in the school system that their child is safe and sound within their walls. The school district has both a legal and moral responsibility. I'm going to end it there. I'm going to take the stuff off. I'm going to pass it up. These are the obvious weaknesses that my expert agreed upon. Again, I'm not going to mention them. I'll pass it over to Dr. Dickinson. Thank you for your time, board.
Thank you, Mr. Short.
I wanted to make two comments before really starting, and that's that I really do greatly admire the work that people in this room do. I'm not as involved as you are, and I'm about a meeting a month away from not being invited back home. The second thing is, as the person who was sitting next to me and had to leave for something with her kids said, she appreciates, and I echo, the honest dialogue and willingness to have open discussion where challenges are raised to help make progress. But what I wanted to talk about today, and really, I mean, this is the best board meeting I've been to, and I've been to a lot of them. There is a petition, right? So Dr. Wong would have been right a week ago, but we're up to 725 signatures. 3 people actually signed this petition while we were discussing tonight. And it talks about things like getting 48.6% of our formula. And it talks about things like being $15 million shortchanged last year after we got the $1 million extra dollars. It talks about getting $1,200 per student thereabouts instead of the average in the state of $6,000. It's fact-checked. That's one of the good things about working together is that these are, Dr. Melange through to Fair Funding Committee, through to, these are the facts. I mean, they're not, if you haven't read it, I mean, I certainly encourage you to do it. It's a quick read. It's about a page, 3/4 of a page on Microsoft Word. I appreciate that some have signed it. I think we all should. There's no one who lives in Cherry Hill or gets paid by Cherry Hill or has any interest in anyone in Cherry Hill who shouldn't sign it. The Sun wrote an article about it. I don't know what it looked like in print. It's interesting. And there is calling starting this week that's important. But just to say, you've done, I think, all the right things in the past. I think there's no doubt about it. But the momentum is now. There's a new governor. There's 725 signatures. I really think that's the tip of the iceberg. I don't know. But it's a lot. There are 3 meetings that we discussed tonight, or not we, but you discussed tonight, where there was no public comment. This is some public comment. It's a lot. And we're talking about a petition that's been circulating for 10 to 14 days. The second thing is, I think there's question, I think so, based on the Sun article, about whether to go for 51 million or 102 million in the referendum. I think it's got to be 102. If we're $180 million behind today, and we're asking for money for 20 years, to me, 51 million, it's not the right idea. And I think the communications plan is now really the critical thing. We have to really make this nuanced case to the community, is that their district isn't being destroyed, but it will be without huge injections of money. I think it's a nuanced case, but I think it needs to be made. The other thing is, recently approved a contract for Dr. Melange. I think it's right. I think we're in crisis, and we don't need negotiations at that time to be detrimental. I think the teachers need a contract. I don't know where that will only reach me once it gets to crisis point, so I don't know. But I hope that's a non-issue this year. The only other thing I would say, District Policy 0146 seems to inform how the board can get involved personally while not representing the board as a whole. I'm not a lawyer, but I would direct there. I think
I got to stop you there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay. Seeing none, I think Mrs. Matlack has a motion for us.
Yes, apparently I do.
Yes.
My name is Dora James. I live at 1 Coventry Court in Cherry Hill. We have a problem at one of your schools that needs to be addressed with bullying. We feel as though my grandson goes there, and I've talked to, I can't remember his name, but I've talked to him. We've just had big problems with bullying, and that the professionals there do not know what bullying is. My grandchild was bullied by a teacher in a whole classroom in January. That teacher now has retired. But when we came to the school to ask for my grandchild to be moved, because now he is being bullied by his whole class, nothing's been done. They keep coming back telling us, oh, your grandchild done this, your grandchild done that. He has to go see a doctor. The doctor asked me twice, what's going on at that school? Because when I talk to your grandson, there's nothing the matter with him. There's something going on at that school. I mean, he's being bullied down every day. Every single day. He hates going to school. And there's nothing being done at Kilmore Elementary School. Every time we call, I called there yesterday, and they went there and they grilled my grandson as though he was lying. He's being teased in the cafeteria. They have now set up a program where they want us to take him out of the Kilmer school and put him in a school for exceptional other kids, because they don't want to deal with the problem. He's been told that he'll be urinating in his mouth. And when I went to the school, the principal said to me, "You had the words wrong." He said he urinates in his own mouth. I said, "What difference does that make?" There's something that should have been done with that child when he came to my grandson and said that. But nothing was done until me or even my daughter go to the school. We have to take time, go out to the school instead of calling, because they won't do anything. And my grandson is tired of it. The kids are telling him, calling him, you don't have any friends, and they're telling me that's not bullying. I want to know what is the guidelines on bullying and who is telling these people at Kilmer Elementary School the guidelines for bullying. Because my grandson is 8 years old and he should not have to go through this. And every single day he's going through this. And we are tired of it. So we have called the Board of Education many a times. And the school has turned it around to make it look like my grandson's always doing something. And I'm not saying he never does anything, but not at this extent. When that teacher bring the whole classroom of kids out to the playground in front of parents, it started the season right there in January. And they will not remove my grandson out of the classroom, and we asked to be moved out. And nothing was done. And to this day, nothing's done. And we're upset about it.
Ms. James, can you do me a favor? Mrs. Wilson is sitting over, she's waving her hand. Will you give her your contact information?
Yeah.
And I'll be in touch with you tomorrow.
Hi, my name is Janae. I live at 1 Coventry Court as well. I'm the child's mom. I just want to reinstate just how frustrated I am as a parent, that I can't even feel safe while my son's at school for 8 hours. I go to work and legitimately look at my phone, wait for it to ring. It's always my son's fault. Like I said, there's been incidents where we're very inappropriate, where the teacher came out arguing with my mom. Also, I'm very concerned that my son is telling me at lunch for indoor recess that there is nobody watching these kids in 2 classrooms. There's an aide going between his class and another classroom, peeking her head in every 15 minutes. That concerns me, because most of the time when I'm getting these calls is in regards to when there's nobody watching these kids. So for his safety, that concerns me. As far as the principal, we done had many meetings, and I had stated in the beginning, can I please remove my son out of this class? They had given me every reason to not remove him. Oh, okay, no, don't worry about it. Mrs. Smith whoever is retiring. That's not good enough. My son is still in the same predicament with those kids, which the teacher already made it so those kids could pick on my kid. He's uncomfortable. He doesn't want to go to school. And I'm just concerned at this point. Like I said, I'm concerned that there's nobody watching these kids at indoor recess, that there's an aide. And it's just so much going on at the school. I mean, as a parent, I'm very concerned. What else to do? We have called. I went to the principal. My mom spoke to the superintendent. At this point, I'm very frustrated. And I just think it's bad for Cherry Hill that a kid does not want to go to school due to bullying. And he kind of feels as though he can't speak to anybody, that whatever he says to an adult, they turn around on him. And we have caught these adults in lies. We've been told by the principal, oh, my adults wouldn't lie. That is a lie, because we have caught them in lies. They just don't know that we know the truth, but we question them to see what they say. And then I go ahead and appear and say, well, why does this happen? Then it's like, well, we didn't mean it that way. So as a parent, if I'm frustrated, I can only imagine how my son feels, and he's only 8. I shouldn't have to tell an 8-year-old that he cannot speak to anybody in that school, because when he does, they want him to go see a doctor. That's the problem, that everything he says is turned around. And like I said, I want to reinstate, he's 8 in 3rd grade, that I have to tell him when he goes to school that you must call, if there's a problem, Jaden, you must ask to speak to the principal and ask him to call your mom or your grandma, because every time we allow him to speak to any adult in that school, they turn it around. And I don't know if they don't like him. I don't know what it is, but I feel as though my child's a marked child in that school, and I'm very concerned. So I just want to reinstate as a parent how frustrated I am that we have climate change. We took the proper to speak to the proper people as we needed to speak to. Because he also gets help with special education. They can't help. This one can't help. Nobody works together. With the principal of special education, nobody communicates with each other, but yet everybody wants to call me. So as a parent, I just want to reinstate just how frustrated I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Same thing. If you'll see Mrs. Wilson and give her your contact information. Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? No. Seeing none. Mrs. Matlack.
I'd like to make a motion to go back into executive session to discuss a personnel issue. No action will be taken, and we will not be coming back into public session after. May I have a second? Mrs. Judge. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.